Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and one of the things we enjoy doing most is giving you a chance to get to know some of the really creative and wonderful individuals on the Jewish scene who are having a profound impact on Jewish life today, as well as helping to shape the Jewish future. And one of the most wonderful is a man you've seen many times on JBS Shalom TV. You may have been fortunate enough to have seen him moderate programs at the 92nd Street Y, where he's becoming a major personality, interviewing some of the most important people in America. Or you may have seen him participating in public forums himself. Or you may have read one of his superb books or one of his brilliant essays or op-ed pieces. It's my pleasure to welcome to L'Chaim Thane Rosenbaum, law professor and director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society at NYU Law School. And to give you a sense of Thane's writings, in addition to nonfiction works like The Myth of Moral Justice, his coming-out novel, Elijah Visible, was a collection of stories about a man paralyzed by the legacy of the Holocaust, and won Thane enormous acclaim as an important new voice on the American literary scene. Thane's novel, Second-Hand Smoke, a brilliant title for a book that deals with the second generation, tells the story of two sons of a mother who survived the Shoah by being a card shark and an aide to mobsters. And one of her sons in the novel was secretly abandoned in Poland, while the other is a fiercely avenging Nazi hunter in the United States. That's Second-Hand Smoke, a riveting story. And Thane's novel, The Golems of Gotham, tells the story of a mystery writer whose parents, Holocaust survivors, have committed suicide, and whose 14-year-old daughter is bent on freeing her father from writer's block by summoning the spirits of his parents, as well as those of Primo Levi and a host of other moral philosophers associated with the Holocaust. And Thane Rosenbaum's most recent book, entitled Payback, The Case for Revenge, explores the relationship between revenge and justice. And one of the real joys for me personally of doing JBS Shalom TV is that I've become real friends with a most extraordinary human being. And Thane, it's wonderful having just you at this table. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for including me, Mark. You're one of my favorite people.
That's lovely for me to hear, and you mind. And I said to you, Thane, I want you to come and just sit with me, and I want the audience to get to know you. I want to talk about you, and then some of your ideas. I know something of your background. I don't know the extent to which the audience does. In terms of how you were raised and who your parents are and your background, talk a little bit about your growing up years and who you were and who your mother and father were.
Well, I was born in New York City and raised in Miami Beach, Florida, which is one of the reasons why so many of the novels are set in New York City and in Miami Beach, Florida.
Yes.
And my parents were Holocaust survivors. I was an only child. And
your parents' names?
Norman Rosenbaum and Betty Rosenbaum. Not unsurprising for survivors. In their cases, they never really discussed it. I was aware of their backstories, but not of anything specific, and they didn't discuss it, and they didn't really associate with what was then known as refugees, not Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
People forgot that was a more recent term of art. It's one of those, quirks of family history that you can, if you deprive your children of the stories of the family, they oftentimes surprise you by finding a way to rediscover, or in my case, reimagine it. Because while they never discussed the Holocaust, they died when I was quite young. Years later, I wound up writing novels that had post-Holocaust themes.
And I'm sorry, how young were you when you died?
I was just out of high school.
Okay. They did not talk to you about the Holocaust before they died.
Almost never.
You know, it's hard to know why, but as you reflect on it, do you have any idea why they didn't?
I mean, I think they were just too, I mean, a number of things. One, I think they were too traumatized.
Where were they in the Holocaust?
They were both in camps. My mother was in Majdanek. My father was in a number of labor camps and spent some time in Auschwitz.
So they had a real hard time.
Right. I mean, they had had the worst of it, and my father, I did not know until after he was dead, had lost a wife in the camps, and my mother had lost her entire family. She was a teenager in Majdanek. And I think that they, had, traumatized memories, and I think they also had dark secrets, and some of my books actually try to look into those dark secrets.
You did not have a sibling to share this with?
No.
Did you have any family beyond your mother and father to share this with?
I had cousins in Brooklyn whose parents were also survivors.
Did their parents talk?
No.
Thane, just reflect upon this. This is off your personal story, but you've done a lot of reflecting on not simply the Shoah, but also how first and second generation people have dealt with it. Talk to me for a moment about what you believe either motivates some people to want to talk and also prevents people sometimes from telling even their children the things that they went through.
Well, I mean, remember, the world of the concentration camps was surreal. I mean, there's nothing about them that is easily retranslated into, common vernacular, common speech, common experiences. In fact, there's almost something bizarre about the idea that survivors of death camps would ultimately join the PTA and take their children to Dairy Queen. It's a real discordant relationship. And I think that it was very difficult to try to maintain a kind of memory and at the same time re-enter the new living world. So for some people, simply it was a survival mechanism. Mm-hmm. Keep it at a distance because they're so irreconcilable to try to rethink, reimagine, recall this something so unimaginable and horrific.
And finish about your own parents. Were your own parents happy people?
I would say not. I mean, I think that they presented themselves, certainly my mother, who was very much a lively spirit, but I think they were tortured people. They suffered greatly from nightmares. My father died of heart attack. He had numbers in his lifetime, and the cardiologist actually told me, he said that he died of nightmares, and I'd think that can't possibly be a diagnosis, but it is. That can't. Where does that say? Where does that show in the autopsy report? But in a way, it's true. Mm-hmm. I think that we are starting to see that. There are such things as broken hearts.
Thane, did it make you angry?
No. I mean, I think I felt it. I was so young when they died, but I think.
And you didn't get angry?
I was too young and probably shocked to think that I was alone in the world. But
you were alone.
I was completely alone.
How did you handle that?
It's funny. As an adult, I can't imagine it now. But when you're 18,
somehow you do it.
You just do it. And again, I think it's an interesting story. My daughter went to Israel for a year, and when I took her to JFK with the group that she was flying off with, she was a little weepy. And at one point, I said to her, we both recognized. I said, come on, 2 years younger than where you are right now, your grandmother was alone in the Warsaw Ghetto. Her parents had already been killed. Just in terms of perspective, you're flying off to Israel, for this incredible adventure. And I think she told me, months later, that how important that was for perspective, that the legacy of her family is so unimaginable that nothing that she could possibly do should ever cause the kind of fear that should stop her. Because again, when I was 18, I was alone. And these are stories this is the story of our family.
So I asked you if your parents were happy. You said probably not inside, no matter how your mother handled it. Were you able to be happy?
I think I was. I thought I lived an ideal childhood, but I did. But
I'm now talking as an adult. I'm wondering the extent to which, and again, I've spoken to other second generation, but you've done you spent your life in some way, your adult life, looking at it, analyzing it, and then most importantly, writing about it. So I'm asking you from a different perspective than I might somebody else sitting at this table. Okay. To what extent is the second generation in some way burdened by this in a way that makes it hard for you to enjoy life? And I want to tell you one very quick story. At this table, I was talking to Avi Hoffman. He's an actor,
Sure, yeah.
second generation.
Love him.
And Avi Hoffman said to me, when I was growing up, even as a young adult, as a parent myself, I always felt guilty if I was having fun. How could I have a good time when I know what my parents went through? And if I had something bad happen to me, bad, I would say to myself, no matter how bad it is, it can't compare to what my parents went through. And as a result, I never permitted myself to even feel bad about the bad that I had to endure. And I thought it was an interesting insight. And I'm wondering, does that resonate with you at all? And how do you talk about it now philosophically as a writer and as a thinker?
Well, secondhand smoke,
Yes,
as I coined in the novel, is a burden. It's a horrible burden because, on the one hand, everything you know is in the context of broken parents. There's no before. There's only, like, for instance, the parents at least had a before. They had a childhood. They had something they were. Again, and there's nothing comparable here, right? I mean, what the children experience is simply living among damaged people. That's a burden, but it's certainly not the kind of hardship of what the parents endured. But it's clearly a burden to feel the responsibility to try to bring joy, to have the obligation to do good things, to only give them happiness.
Giving them meaning?
The parents, yeah.
Parents.
Many children of survivors felt that impulse. And that's why a good friend of mine, Eva Fogelman, who's a very well-known psychologist and a child of survivors, points out that the number of children of survivors that went into the mental health profession, the healing profession,
Huge
is
number,
stunning.
Right. Yes.
But maybe in some ways not surprising.
Yes.
That these were people who early on recognized the value of bringing, repair, healing, tikkun, to people from a very young age. But again, I just don't like to, confuse the traumas, right? One is really is a burden, and the other is unimaginable,
Correct.
Unthinkable. But yes, children survivors tend to have these feelings. For me, look, if you read the novels, it doesn't look like I had a great childhood. But my friends from childhood who read the novels don't understand where they're come from, because I didn't present as if I was troubled by this, and perhaps in the way that my mother didn't present what was behind her. My friends have constantly remarked that they're shocked that this is what comes out of me. And I'll tell you, my parents would have been surprised, because I think they would have said, we did everything possible to shield you. And how did this happen? How would you left a large law firm for this? You know what kind of money you could have had? What kind of an idiot makes this kind of disastrous, colossal career change?
But it's not possible to shield.
No, look, but I think that this is true even in a far more normal families. Parents that pretend not to give their children a sense of money troubles, forget it. The kids know. Alcoholism, kids know. There's no way to shield your children of what haunts the parents the most.
Okay. And then the question is, how does this affect you as a parent vis-a-vis your daughter?
Look, I have a few children, actually, and I don't...
How many children do you have?
I have 4.
4 children. Okay. Where are they in life?
Oh, 3 are in college, and 1 is still in middle school.
Okay.
And I try not to, I figure they're going to pick up this legacy. I've never really, I think I'm rare in that way, because I've never really discussed it. And I think it's because it's so built into what I do. I wrote a short story a number of years ago about a father who had 4 daughters and who was quiet about the Holocaust and quite they all meet up in Israel for something. But I think I speak to it more directly in art But in my private life, I try to, I think that it's important. I think that lesson from the Golems of Gotham is that you have to embrace life. That if you live with a traumatic past, you won't be living.
Mm-hmm. Do your children ask you questions about their grandparents?
No. But they're aware. I mean, everybody's aware, but they don't. They don't ask specific. And and I think they also know that I'm not an authority. My parents were mysteries to me. Mm-hmm. I think that's another reason I wrote novels. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know them. They were strangers. Mm-hmm. I mean, we happened to live in the same house, but that was a coincidence. They didn't share anything with me, and I.
Hasn't that been hard on you, though? That your parents were a mystery, or there is this mystery and it's interesting. There are people who have nothing like what the second generation has in terms of the holes, the dark holes that they just have no idea what's in them. Ordinary people very often grow up and realize how little they know of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents' life. But for you, and I'm saying for you, for the second generation, I imagine it's harder, Thane.
Well, I mean, it's harder because there's this there is an awareness of what was once there. That there once were grandparents who were never met, uncles and aunts. In my father's case, he had 13 brothers and sisters. Only 3 survived. One had made Aliyah in 1933, and the other 2 somehow made it out of the camps. And that's kind of the par for the course, right? Mm-hmm. People don't realize what the Holocaust was ultimately a Polish tragedy. It's 9 out of 10 Polish Jews were killed. 9 out of 10. It's 2 out of 3 European Jews, but 9 out of 10 Polish Jews.
Extraordinarily high number.
Impossible.
90%.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
So if you think he were 13 kids in the family, and 3 survived. 2 actually survived. 1 had already made Aliyah. I think that is what deepens the problem. That you know how much holes you have to try to fill. It's too much, and I think it is obviously a burden. But the burden is also one of the obligation to embrace life. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's a twin burden, and that the novel The Golems of Gotham is about this. On the one hand, there needs to be remembrance, and on the other hand, there needs to be life.
So I want to ask just one more question overall for you. Mm-hmm. As you look at what you do professionally and what you do personally, to what extent does the Holocaust, does the Shoah now drive who you are, what you do, the decisions you make?
All of it. Every part of it. I mean, I'm a human rights writer, professor. I mean, all of my novels deal with post-Holocaust moral themes. I even wrote a book, The Myth of Moral Justice. I mean, fascinated by moral questions. Even Payback, The Case for Revenge is a book about morality and what is fundamental distinctions between right and wrong, and the emotional needs of people to feel vindicated, to feel that there's justice in their world. All of these things were no doubt influenced by, and clearly all the fiction, because the fiction in many ways is an answer to all that I didn't know.
So I want to transition with you. I want you now to reflect, not necessarily upon your childhood as it relates to your parents and then growing up as a second generation, but as someone who has championed liberal causes. And I want to know, as you look at yourself and you reflect upon who you are now, even as whatever arc you've had in the last 5 to 10 years, has there been movement in your mind? Not are you less committed in any way to the principles that drove you your entire life, both as a thinker, a writer, a lawyer, someone who's been involved in major good work on college campuses and off. But I do want to know, as you look at your stances on Israel, as you look right now, as you talk about how the world is dealing with radical Islam and how Thane Rosenbaum wants to speak and wants to write, if somebody were to say to you, Thane, you used to be a real liberal, and you're no longer a real liberal. And what they mean by that is that you would write differently and you would argue differently than you would have even 5 years ago. I want to know, as you reflect upon yourself now in that vein, has there been a movement? Have you evolved in some way that you can identify for yourself? Forget about the audience, for yourself. And so when Thane Rosenbaum says, yes, it's not a first, but it's never been a First Amendment right. Nobody said the Met couldn't do it, had no right to do it. Nobody's saying about what the Muslim community has a right to do near ground zero. But there are some people who would argue it's inappropriate for Jews even to make an issue of the Met putting on an opera that is entitled The Death of Klinghoffer, not the murder of Klinghoffer. And that you shouldn't be even suggesting that the Muslim community doesn't have the right to build a mosque anywhere they want. If it's in, by the way, it wasn't at ground zero. It was near ground zero. Right. So that at one point, we would never have expected Thane Rosenbaum to take that position. And where are you these days on the two-state solution and why there's no peace in the Middle East and what is appropriate or is not appropriate in settlements? And, you know how much I just love talking to you about all of these issues, but I'm asking you now to reflect upon your own journey. How do you self-define now? And if somebody said to you, Thane Rosenbaum, you're not the liberal you used to be, what would you say? And I remind you, you wrote this article, I think in the Wall Street Journal, and you got murdered because you were saying that what Hamas was doing was really using their children as shields, and they were sacrificing their children, and you were critical of it. Boy, did you take a beating, Thane. So I'm asking you, how do you now self-identify yourself as a liberal, or, and it's even, I don't even want to label you, how do you see yourself now in terms of the major sensitive issues that are confronting world Jewish life, the state of Israel, and really life as a whole, having nothing to do with Jewish?
It's funny, especially speaking about this with you for a number of reasons, because when you first had me on your show years ago, I was the resident liberal.
Absolutely. And
I think you yourself used to be shocked over the years by what I was saying, because you said, Thane, this is not the spot I usually put you in. Moving.
Yes, in all fairness, I didn't quite say it that way. Yeah. Because I didn't care about the spot.
Right.
But you're correct.
That you were surprised.
Yes, and any of you who have been watching L'Chaim and Shalom TV, JBS, you know very often I put together panels, and Thane has represented the more liberal or left position. And there's no question that over time, you've said when you sit at this table with whoever, I know I used to say this, but I want to say it a little bit differently now. So it's interesting to me to hear how you would self-identify.
Look, I don't think I've changed. I think everyone else has changed. I consider myself still liberal. I say this all the time. For 6 years, I was the literary editor for Tikkun magazine. You can't get more left. Nation magazine thinks they're too left, right? Everyone thinks. So, I thought, there's still people that don't forgive me for having been at Tikkun for 6 years. So I don't.
But the question is, would you do it again?
Yeah, well.
Would you do it now?
Look.
Would you be the editor of Tikkun now?
Yeah.
Would you?
I would be, but I would be writing it differently.
Right.
I would be right, but.
Okay,
again,
and but that's honest. So define the difference. What do you mean I write it differently?
It's not that it's so.
Yes, it's different. You said it.
No, I know, you're right, but it's complicated because I say that a lot of the change, if there is a change, had to do with a number of things that all happened in the 2000s. The beheading of Daniel Pearl, the continued rockets fired from Gaza into Israel after Israel's withdrawal, the kidnapping of soldiers after withdrawal, what happened on the border with Lebanon. These things, for me, were life-changing because I looked at them and said, whoa, this doesn't look like nation building to me. This doesn't look like a people, the Palestinians or the Hezbollah. This doesn't look like people that are looking to share this region. This looks like something else. This is looking like what I thought crazy ultranationalists believed, but it's starting to look like, wait a minute, if the Israelis aren't even in Gaza, why is this still happening? I wrote an essay this summer for Haaretz about, which was somewhat humorous, but I thought took it very seriously. Say, look, if Hamas, after Israel had withdrawn, had called up Sheldon Adelson, of all people, and said, Mr. Adelson, you're a Jew, we don't love you, but you're great with casinos. Is there any way you'd be willing to build some hotels in this beautiful beachside enclave called Gaza, and we'll come up with a nice profit sharing, revenue sharing, and we believe me, we will not break hollow with you, but we'd like to go in business with you. They would have turned that into Macau. That would have been the Riviera. And we would not be having this conversation. Instead of nothing but sand and dirt and rubble and tunnels, they would have had something that they could have been really proud of. It would have been an income generator. It would have been an engine for economic growth and jobs. And instead, we see what we see. So again, yes, things happened in the early years of the 2000s that made me rethink some of these ideas. But in terms of being a liberal, I think that I'm still very faithful to liberal values. There's nothing liberal about what you said before, about people saying it's not appropriate to call attention to Palestinian failure. It's not appropriate to call attention to Jews not thinking it's appropriate for there to be the death of Klinghoffer. To be liberal is to be open.
Absolutely.
It's to be open-minded. In fact, I have to say, a very beautiful compliment was paid to me recently at the 92nd Street Y. I had Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Brett Stevens. In fact, I think I spoke to your producer before the show, and I think you might actually end up broadcasting it, and I recommend that you do, because it's really one of the best hour-and-a-half programs I've ever been involved with. But Brett Stevens on that program at one point turns to me and he says, I'm happy to be on stage with Thane Rosenbaum, who is, and I think he said, who is one of the few liberals who's actually a liberal. And I thought that's...
He's exactly right.
That actually I'm open to the world around me. And what we're seeing instead with what are deemed progressive liberals is closing the world around us, creating barriers, making it impossible to have even a conversation, being impossible to even be critical, right? The whole idea of what being liberal means to be uncritical. And that's not true. To be liberal is to be open and critical. So when I see liberals saying, well, you can't say this about the Palestinians, you can't call attention to moral failure or complicity among the Palestinians, you have to only be tough on Israel, you can't ever say anything about Palestinians, that's not liberal, that's fascism. There's nothing liberal about that. There's nothing open about that. To be open-minded, to be critically thinking, to be able to make moral distinctions, that's what liberalism is. To be able to call attention to other values, competing values, right? To be able to make fundamental distinctions between right and wrong, to call people to account, to subject them to moral criticism, scrutiny, judgment. Liberals. That's what the rule of law is, to judge, to be able to openly look at things in a very critical way. That's not what liberals are doing today. Liberals are doing today is what you cannot do, what is considered transgressive, imperial, colonial, ethnocentric, arrogant, nationalistic. That's not liberal to me. That's closed-minded, it's intellectually dishonest, it's morally obtuse.
There's no question you're still as liberal as you always have been, but a liberal with integrity is always open to also having views change. And it's when the facts on the ground change,
Absolutely.
You apply the same principles, you may come to different conclusions.
Which is why I said I would just write it differently.
Yes,
I mean, I would still be
yes.
liberal, but I'm observing what everyone else is
Yes.
looking at, and I'm not willing to excuse everything that the Palestinians do. And liberals, in order to be a liberal, that's what you have to do. I wrote something for the Times of Israel this past summer. I call it the Palestinian Pass. Palestinian Pass it's a very strange principle. Everything is excused, all is forgiven. Moral purity and perfection is expected of Israel. Nothing is expected of Palestinians. Nothing. Hey, when you and I were on this program with Peter Beinart, who you know, I have a lot of affection for Peter. I don't agree with anything he says almost. But I was shocked. I was appalled. Because yes, he, in my mind, would pay lip service to what Palestinians do that's not good, but he was in and out of that within seconds. Within less than 3 seconds, he was out of what the Palestinians do, and his focus was entirely on Israel. Mm-hmm. And there was no sense of just an open, honest discussion about what do we see in Gaza. Yes, I understand where the failures are in Israel, but what do we see among the Palestinians? What messages are being sent? What should the Israelis interpret from these messages? Evaluate behavior, conduct. By the way, that Wall Street Journal article, you're quite, right, I was vilified around the country, certainly on social media. And I was just asking the kind of question that someone in my position who'd been a law professor for 22 years would ask, which is, when we use the words innocent civilians in the context of Gaza, what does that mean? That's a question. It's called a question. And liberals should be able to, that's a question, right? It's nothing worse. I'm only 5'8". I can't cause that much damage. It's just a question. And what's the question is, well, the Geneva Convention looks at civilians in the conventional sense. You run into a farmhouse, you pull out the children, and you threaten them or use them in some way as a shield or some way to place them in harm's way. It's a little different in Gaza, where the Gazans elected a terrorist organization. The Gazans stored the weapons of the terrorist organization in their homes. They invited terrorists to live in their homes and use the homes as command centers. And they refused to even let their children leave the house when there was the threat of rocket fire. Those 5 elements look a lot more like material assistance given to Hamas. And although you're not wearing a uniform, you do look like you're more on the road to being a soldier than you are to being like in the farmhouse. That was all I wanted to say. And it was, awful all over. People calling for, I had death threats, people calling NYU that I should be fired, misrepresenting what I said. They're saying Thane Rosenbaum thinks that children are legitimate targets. I said, no. I said, Palestinians have made their children targets. There's a difference. I don't think they're legitimate targets. I think they're illegitimate targets. In fact, I said...
Yes, they claimed you wanted to kill Palestinian babies.
Yeah, well, the essay is only 802 words. You can read it, right? I keep saying, yeah, I know what they say, but it's 802 words. You can get through it pretty quickly. There's not, in fact, I even said, children aren't even part of this discussion because they're not capable of making adult decisions. But the reality is, Israel is in a war, and there's a different civilian standards and military doctrine are 2 different concepts, and this is what happens in them.
How did you experience that entire flap where you're called somebody who wants babies to be killed and you should be fired? And it's as if every credential you've ever built...
I'm a human rights professor. They started to put it in quotes.
Yeah.
They started to say, oh yeah, human rights professor. He wants to kill children.
Yes. How did you deal with that personally?
Look, it was awful, except that I knew what I wrote. And so people ask me all the time. One of my children said to me, are you okay with this? And I said, look, I'd rather it didn't happen because it's deflecting the real issue. I was really just calling attention to this question of disproportionate damage and why there is disproportionate loss.
Oh, your friends stayed by you.
I did, yeah, well, one of them was you.
Absolutely.
One of them was you.
Absolutely.
And I did receive very lovely, supportive notes from people. But social media is a young man's game. And social media is an angry person's game. It's for people sitting in their underwear, eating donuts, and thinking they have a voice. It's the democratizing of idiocy. And so I was subjected to a lot of vitriol and attack and insult.
I was very upset for you. I'm very angry for you.
But I felt that, it goes back to the topic of our discussion. I mean, I've tried to live a life of moral truth.
You have enormous intellectual integrity, and you have enormous courage.
Thank you.
And it's one of the reasons why I just think everybody who knows you is drawn to you. We don't find it in many people. You are a remarkable human being in that regard.
Thank you.
And again, I'm going to say it to you again one more time, but I want to give you a chance to say one more thing as we sit here together. What troubles you most when you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What troubles you most now about Israel's behavior? Is there something you believe Israel could do differently? Is there something you say to yourself, there's no peace at the moment because Israel is either not doing or is doing something? And I don't want to lead you, I don't want to put words in your mouth. The answer you may say to me is, I don't see it that way anymore. But I want to give you a chance to say it any way you want. When you look at the conflict, how do you portray Israel in your mind?
Look, I'm, as you know, not one of the Israel bashers, certainly not anymore. I've been a real defender of Israel for a number of years now, and I look at it very soberly and clear-eyed and say, here's a country that has been recognizing a 2-state solution They have, released prisoners. There's a whole series of gestures that the Israelis, a moratorium on building, right? People now talk about the rebuilding in East Jerusalem, but there was a 10-month moratorium that ended in nothing, right? So people don't credit Israel for when it does the right thing. Look, I'm a Jew, and so therefore, not unlike Peter Beinart and the others among the liberal, quote, liberal Jews, who are what I would call progressive Jews, who find it far more interesting or fashionable to just criticize Israel and expect moral perfection. I'm not someone who's blind to Israel errors. I mean, as you know, I was always opposed to settlements in the West Bank. I did think that Netanyahu lost some opportunities in not strengthening Abbas. I understand he's not a perfect marriage partner. I understand he's not, but he was, in my mind, the best Israel was ever going to get. And I thought there were a number of opportunities, and I debated a number of people on at this table who said, here are the words that Abbas really says. I think Mort Klein once said, this is what's really being said. And you think this is the partner? I said, look, he's not perfect, but he's better than we've ever seen. And I thought that those opportunities were lost, especially after what happened in Gaza, where what really happens with Hamas as opposed to what we were able to see where, West Bank was calm, it was peaceful. There was the sense of the resurrection of a true life, the possibility of nation building. Look, I would not, I thought that what Israel's recently done in the East Jerusalem with the contemplation of new building, the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, I would have liked, especially in the aftermath of Gaza, for there to have not been that. I thought that the global provocation was so great. The world's sense of Israel with 2,000 Palestinian dead was so much on edge. There was such tension. I understand that Netanyahu had his own political troubles. And I understand that he had to explain to his people why he left 10 tunnels and another 4,000 rockets. I get it. I understand that they were saying the Israeli people, was it 75% of the country, said get all the tunnels, get all the rockets. And he withdrew, and I think that he needed to send a message. And the message was sent by the one thing that drives everybody nuts, which is what? Buildings and expansions of settlements. I would have wished he had waited. I just think that it's not like Israel should wait for the world to protect Israel. We understand. We understand even the United States is not the United States that even Nixon was, to Golda Meir. This is a very different White House. I get it. Yes, they've done a lot, but the rhetoric that comes out of the White House, especially recently, chicken shit? Is that the word that you use for an Israeli commando? It's sort of odd to me. But yes, I just think that the hot button has always been East Jerusalem building and West Bank settlements. And the fact that we're still having this conversation so soon after the war in Gaza is frightening to me, because the world's perception does matter, and Israel's moral high ground also should matter. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be maybe building in Jerusalem to pick up for these, because you and I have talked about this, population needs, right? I understand that. But no one can tell me that these acts were not done without a sense of provocation. A message was being sent to the other side. We left you some tunnels, but you have not broken this unification government between, the Israelis are saying, look, after this war, you would think Abbas would disassociate himself with Hamas. And if you're not, I'm going to start building again. I understand where the argument is. But I also understand that we're living in a world that saw the 2,000 Palestinian dead in very stark, very, very hypocritical terms, right? Because nobody worries about how many civilians the United States kills. Or even worse, when Arabs kill Arabs, nobody seems to care about that. It's only when Jews kill Arabs. I understand the hypocrisy. But I'm also not unmindful to both the double standard and the world's global perception. And the global perception of Israel continuing to expand settlements in the aftermath of the war and with a hope of trying to reignite the peace talks, it looks bad, and it hasn't served their interests. I'm not sure at this point what they get out of it other than sending Hamas a message. We left early, but we're still in charge.
You spoke a few moments ago about a certain sense of hubris, and the American Jew should not be too arrogant. Are you suggesting you're smarter than all the people in the Israel?
No.
Why do you think, when I hear this, one of the questions I always ask myself is, if it's so obvious to American Jews,
Yeah.
is it not similarly obvious to people who are in the Knesset? And is it that they're in the situation in a way that we are not? They see it, in fact, more clearly than we do. They understand the mentality of the people they're dealing with in ways that American Jews do not have a clue.
Absolutely right.
And so my own reaction is, maybe there's something here we don't really understand.
But do we know, but that's an interesting question, Mark, but do we know, has there been any polling on Israelis now about expanding the building? Because I think there's a difference between expansion of the settlements and building in East Jerusalem and what Netanyahu's government thinks is appropriate and what the people think is appropriate. And it's not clear to me that the Israeli people support, at this moment in time, expanding settlements and adding to the East Jerusalem building stock.
And is it clear to you that the Israeli people are against it?
No, I just don't know.
So?
I agree. I don't know. I don't know.
But
Look,
what I hear many people say, many Israelis say to me is, the one place you don't tell us not to build is Jerusalem.
yeah, no, look,
It's different than, deep into the West Bank.
But even if you did,
by the way,
why-
American
but
Jews
why
don't
now?
understand. East
But-
Jerusalem is on
Right.
the other side of the Green Line.
right. But why now, though, right? I mean, again, as I said before, I said I'm not saying that they shouldn't build, but I'm saying why now? Why something that's
Are
so
you not
easily...
You're not saying they shouldn't build?
No, I said before, I said, look, there may be reasons for just demographics and job, right? That you have population demands, right?
Yes.
That you just need to. For years, Israel claimed that was all East Jerusalem was about. It was merely to accommodate a larger population increase. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm simply saying that it's so clearly a provocation. But yes, again, hubris. I thought one of the finest moments over the summer was that moment when Netanyahu, after another broken ceasefire in which there was 1 or 2 soldiers killed and the thought one was kidnapped, and he simply said, never second guess me again, right? He said, I want to send a message, never second, because, he was being told by the State Department what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
And I'm sorry, was he right to say that?
He was absolutely right. He was absolutely right, saying, look, I know this is, this is really the problem with the Obama White House. It's projecting a kind of their sense of liberal values onto people who don't really share any of those values, right? It's projecting a rationality.
Say that again. That's so important.
Well, it's projecting a values and rationality on a people that have no understanding of that rationality. And
you
have
know about the Palestinian people?
Yeah, and no understanding of it and no respect for it, right? Because under strict adherence to Sharia law, none of those values would mean anything. And so this is the sort of the wish of the liberal universalist, right? That the world sees things the way we see things. Right?
And it's not true,
and
is
it's
it?
not true.
No, it's
I mean,
not.
and we've seen lots of examples of that. What's a really good example? The failure of Arab Spring, right? President George W. Bush said if you could just democratize the Arab-Muslim world, everything would be fine. Well, that happened. And then what happens with democracy in the Arab-Muslim world? The Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah. If given the choice to vote, where's the hearts lie? The hearts lie with extreme radicalized Islamic elements, the majority of people. We were enamored of all the college kids with their Facebook pages and their tweets on Tahrir Square. And that was what the American news captured. But that's not what was on the Arab street. The Arab street was not tweeting. The Arab street was really thinking about something else, and they were thinking about the Brotherhood. And that's the problem, that there's this ongoing effort. This is what John Kerry does, projects a kind of sense of universal liberal principle that just doesn't really seem to apply and is not sticking to that part of the world.
I don't know if you saw a piece by Hisham Melam, who is sort of the Walter Cronkite of the Arab world, and he wrote a piece in Politico, The Barbarians Within Our Gate. And what his message was is that the West, America, does not understand the extent to which basically the entire Arab world has fallen apart, and that it is no longer a cultural center, and that it has nothing to do with Americans ever coming to Iraq.
Yeah.
That internally the Arab world has failed, and that in essence we don't understand the extent to which it's a very different worldview and a very different sense of reality. And we want to project our values onto them, and we want to believe, and it's not like I don't believe. I believe a father is a father and a mother is a mother, but do I believe culturally that people can see things differently? Do I believe people in China and people in Palestine and people in America and Jews see things differently? I do, Thane.
Yeah.
And political realities are driven by that as well. And I want to sort of end here by asking you to comment on how you feel in America we've dealt with the issue of radical Islam, radical terrorism, radical fundamentalist Islamic ideology, and how the liberal community in America, again, is making it very difficult to look at that honestly. And I did want to ask you about your session, and you're doing fabulous work at the 96BY, and yes, we are going to have it on JBS, Shalom TV, but you moderated a discussion with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Bret Stephens. And I want you to identify, in 30 seconds, who Ayaan is and why she is so controversial in the liberal world here in America.
It's so complicated, Mark. You could do hours on this
Yes.
alone. It's actually, in many ways, it's a subtext of the failure of the universities when it comes to really speaking to the people, speaking to actual, literally moral truth. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somalian-born activist, a woman who grew up Muslim, moved to Holland, and she became a member of the Dutch Parliament. And she's written a book, Infidel, which was a memoir about her life. And she's very critical of Islamic practices, specifically against women.
Yes.
The misogyny, the sexual abuse,
Yes.
the treatment, the devaluing of women under Sharia law. This is what she does.
And why was she criticized?
Well, she's criticized because this is where you have this very, paradoxical problem. She's a human rights advocate. There's no question. She's fighting on behalf of women around the world. You're wondering, where are the feminists? Why aren't they supporting her? Isn't this classically liberal? It's really not. What passes for liberalism today in a politically correct world and a culturally relativistic world means you cannot appear to be colonial, imperial. You can't appear to be ethnocentric or intolerant. And in a PC world, if you appear to be intolerant of Muslims, if you're not being respectful of someone else's traditions, if they are offended by what you have to say, then you're not being liberal. Right? And you're saying, what? But liberals are supposed to fight for human rights. Liberals are supposed to fight for truth. Not today. That's why I said I reject when people say I'm not a liberal.
Absolutely right.
I'm a liberal. I don't know what you are, but I'm a liberal because I'm willing to call attention to these problems, to these values. What you are is someone who's saying, we simply feel that we need to coddle and protect people who are marginalized people, in this case Muslims, even though there's 1.6 billion people. Hundreds of millions of Muslims have these feelings, and we're not allowed to talk about it. I mean, we're in trouble in this country if Bill Maher is the only one that's getting away with this, and he's getting hammered. I read yesterday that some universities are now retracting their invitation for him to be a performer.
Yes, and we should. Bill Maher, who is very much on the left, came out on his television show and said, in essence, it is a wider Islamic problem.
Right.
Islamic theology in and of itself is a problematic theology.
It's not a few bad apples.
That's correct.
Right. I mean, that's what this is about. This is what people want to say. They say a number of things that are all false. One is you can't paint with such a broad brush. Unfortunately, it is a broad brush because there's a broad number of people who feel this way. It's hundreds of millions of people believe that those people who leave Islam deserve to die, right? The Pew Report took a number of surveys between 2012 and 2014, and it's shocking. Huge, overwhelming majorities of Muslims believe in stoning, beheadings, dismemberments. What ISIS is doing is revolting to the United States, again, projected from our values, but from the values of some people around the world, it's perfectly appropriate. And so Ayaan Hirsi Ali has had a fatwa against her, like Salman Rushdie did, like the Danish cartoons have, because of what she's done. She's calling attention to what the Quran says about women and is basically giving the world this sense that women under Islam are second-class, third-class citizens.
And what is she asking us to do?
Well, she's asking us not to abandon our liberal values.
Exactly. Right, that's right.
She's saying to us, be an American. You know, do you stand for something or you don't? If you stand for something, if you really believe in humanitarian intervention, help these women. Don't protect the bullies on campuses that are saying you can't say anything about Islam because we will be offended no matter what you say, and you have no right because you're merely imperialistic colonialists and you're ethnocentric and you're not respecting the cultural relativism in our world. And the truth is, what are we being asked to respect? Beheadings? Are we supposed to say, look, we like hamburgers and we like to cut off heads?
Yeah, but in all fairness, no one is saying that. What they are saying is that the people who are beheading represent only 5% of this 1.6 billion people, and that you must be very careful not to confuse radical Islam with Islam in general, and that the criticism from right now the liberal left is that anytime somebody uses the word Islam, it tends to paint with the broad brush.
But there are people, Mark, this is the creepy part, this is the twisted part. There are people that say you can't criticize another religion no matter what they do.
That's correct.
You know, that this is simply ethnocentric. It's simply not respecting the cultural relativism that different cultures have a different logic, and that's their logic. And you may not like it, but that's how they live. And the other thing is, look, the numbers of people who believe in this is demonstrably larger than this 5%. And that's really what, there's another piece of this debate.
This is a war of cultures, is it not?
Look, you know, again, the minute we say the word war, this is the problem, right? They say, you see, you're waging a war against Islam. People are not waging a war against Islam. They're waging a war against the ideas, the doctrinal ideas, and the practices of Islam that are so broadly accepted by a majority of Muslims. It's not about the people. It's not about their skin. It's not about their individual dignity. It's about what they believe, what they follow, what they think is appropriate. We have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And if an idea is bad, it needs to be subject to intellectual and moral inquiry. And we're not allowed to do that, certainly not university campuses. And that's actually a paradox, right? Because you'd think on campuses is the one place where ideas are free to be debated.
I want to say this again. You are courageous.
Thank
you have an extraordinary heart. One of the nicest things that happened to me here at this table is getting to know you. You're a dear, wonderful friend.
Well, I love you.
I love you.
Thank
No,
you.
I love you very much. You're also a fabulous writer. What are you doing next?
I have a new novel coming out in March. The title is How Sweet It Is. And
What's the theme?
Well, How Sweet It Is, remember, was the signature line of Jackie Gleason.
Yes.
And the novel is set in 1972 in Miami Beach. And in the book are Frank Sinatra, Jackie Gleason, Muhammad Ali, Isaac Bashevis Singer, Don Shula. And it really is a kind of romp, because all of those people happen to have been in 1972
Yes.
in Miami Beach. That was, remember, 1972 was a pivotal year. That was the year of the Munich Olympics. It was, and the killing of the Israeli team. It was also the year of the Democratic and Republican conventions were both in Miami Beach that year. So it's a historical piece of 1972. It has a post-Holocaust theme in it. If it's a Thane Rosenbaum book, it probably has that. But and it's funny in its own way. It's a sort of.
So when it comes out, you'll come back and sit at this table?
I would love to. I'd be honored to.
Oh, I'm going to chase you all that. You have to sit at this table every time there's an issue in the Jewish world, and you always say yes.
I'm always happy to be here, Mark.
Always the best.
Thank you,
Thank
my
you.
friend.
Kol tuv v'hatzlacha. Fabulous. Thane Rosenbaum. Thane Rosenbaum, director of the Forum on Law, Culture, and Society at NYU Law School, author of Payback, Secondhand Smoke, The Golubs of Gotham, many other novels and nonfiction, all so well worth your reading. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to the ideas expressed by Thane Rosenbaum. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim was a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.